Okay, so now that we know how we're going to essentially divide radical expressions with addition and subtraction, keep in mind what you saw me do up here is I never performed the division. What I actually did do was a simplification. I rationalized the denominator. So there's pretty much your answer. We technically do not divide radicals. We rationalize denominators because we don't want radicals down the denominator. And what we learned is when there's a sum or difference in the denominator, we make use of the conjugate to help me build my equivalent fraction and get rid of the radical. So you'll see me do that 3 more times. So for here, I'm dividing by 5 plus the square root of 3, radical down below. So I build the equivalent fraction and I make use of my conjugate. So if I'm dividing by 5 plus the square root of 3, my conjugate is 5 minus the square root of 3. Of course, doing the multiplication is tops to tops and bottoms to bottoms. Oops, I think I accidentally put 5 square root of 3. And then we basically FOIL out. I'm going to keep this factor just in case we need to simplify things in the end. But we FOIL 5 times 5 is 25, right? The outer and the inner cancel out, so we're going to get a minus the square root of 3 squared. Again, I'm making use of the difference of squares. That's essentially what it is. Square the first term minus square the last term. Of course, if you want, you can FOIL it out and see that the outer and the inner cancel each other out. So we're left with 2, 5 minus the square root of 3, and down below here we have 25 minus 3 because the square and the square root cancel out. So we have 2, 5 minus the square root of 3 all over 22. Now here, unlike over here where we were separated by an addition, let me rewrite this a little nicer over here. Back here I told you we can't simplify this because that addition's in the way. But here what I do is I have a multiplication. And so the factor of 2 will in fact divide out with the factor of 2 down here. So 2 goes in itself once here and 11 times there. So our final answer here would be 5 minus the square root of 3 all over 11. That's probably the answer you'll see in the back of the book. So again, we're dividing by a sum. I rationalize the denominator by making use of my conjugate, multiply fractions like we normally do, tops to tops, bottoms to bottoms. Because we have the conjugate, we have the difference of squares pattern down below, and then make sure your final answer is in lowest form by dividing out common factors, not common terms, right? So I left this one alone, but did some more work here. So let's just keep going. Now we're dividing by 3 plus the square root of 5. So we're doing radical division, if you would. But as I shared with you guys at the start, we actually never perform the division. What we do is we rationalize the denominator. So we accomplish that by taking a conjugate and multiplying top and bottom by it to make sure I'm in balance. So multiplication is top to top and bottom to bottom. Okay, in the denominator I have the difference of squares. So I have 3 squared minus the square root of 5 squared. Unfortunately, on the top, I'm back to FOILing that all out. So 2 times 3 is 6. The outer would give us a negative 2 square roots of 5. The inner would give us a negative 3 square roots of 5. And then a negative times a negative is a positive. And it looks like we have the square root of 5 squared there when we do the last. So unfortunately, we can't avoid that FOILing. So it's a good thing we reviewed it earlier in this chapter. So what happens here? Well, we have a 6. These two terms are like, so we have a minus 5 square roots of 5, and of course the square root of 5 squared would be 5. Down below I have a 9 minus 5. Right? 3 squared is 9. Here the square root and the 2 cancel each other out. We're left with 9 minus 5. So cleaning this up, upstairs we have 11 minus 5 square roots of 5, and then 9 take away 5 is 4. So I don't see any way to factor anything out to divide out any common factors. So we got lucky there. There's no more work to do, unlike this last one where we had a common factor of 2. We're finished. So that's that idea of a conjugate. Last one, we're dividing radicals, but again, we never actually perform that division. What we do is we rationalize a denominator. Okay, we accomplish that by multiplying the top and bottom by the same conjugate. Again, upstairs we have a multiplication to do because we multiply tops to tops and bottoms to bottoms, and we have the same situation down below. Okay, but the good news for us on the bottom is the difference of squares. So I have the square root of 6 squared minus the square root of 7 squared, and upstairs unfortunately we have to FOIL. So the square root of the square root of 6 times the square root of 6 is the square root of 36. My outer would be a plus square root of 42. My inner would be a plus square root of 42. And my last would be the positive square root of 49. So there's all that work. Square root of 36 is 6. Square root of 42 plus the square root of 42 is 2 square roots of 42. And the square root of 49 is 7. On the bottom, the square root of 6 squared would be 6, and the square root of 7 squared would be 7. So combining like terms upstairs, we have, it looks like 13 plus 2 square roots of 42, all divided by a negative 1. Okay, I doubt if the answer in the back of the book will look that way. We can probably distribute that negative, right? It applies to here and to there. So you'll probably see that in the back of the book. Of course, the last remaining thing to do is to make sure that this guy back here is in lowest terms. And if we start factoring 42, right, that's 6 times 7 and 2 times 3. So there is no nice square, right, in 42. There's no power higher than 2 there. So we're done, all right, so we're all finished. So there's rationalize the denominator. Remember, there's 2 ways to do it. The old way in 10.4, when we only had one term down in the bottom, we could use this trick. And then when we have a sum or a difference down in the bottom, we have to make use of the conjugate and everything that we've been doing, all the multiplication, the division. Heck, we even pulled out the difference of squares, all right, all the way back from chapter, I think it was 4. So a lot of things coming together. Hopefully a good review along with all this new stuff. And that pretty much wraps up that part. One more item to cover in 10.5, but it's things we've already been talking about. I'll see you in the next video.